He didn't call heaven's angels from my hands, pull these nails that torment me.
Good afternoon. On this Thursday, Maundy Thursday, over 2,000 years ago, on this particular day of the week, Jesus Christ was taken in. There was a discussion, a hearing, and then a trial. On the song that you just heard with Had It Not Been, was sung by the Silvertones back in 2016. It was one of the featured songs that we had. And it said a lot about the crucifixion of Christ, and hope you enjoyed it. As we move on into this particular day, this was a very long day for him. And back in 1995, a fellow by the name of Ted Dyer put together 12 errors that were made in the hearing and the trial of Jesus. Ted was a Sunday school teacher. He was also an attorney, so he studied this. Now, I didn't know him at that time. We didn't move to Beaufort until 2005, and when I met him, he was in the late stages of living, and soon afterwards he moved on into heaven. But he left us a real legacy that I'd like to mention to you today. There were at least 12 errors made in the hearing and the trial of Jesus. First of all, they had a hearing before Annas. Annas, yeah, he was a priest. Yes, he was a high priest. But he didn't have any authority whatsoever. And he didn't have any jurisdiction over the hearing. Yet they brought it to him. Secondly, he appeared before Caiaphas, the high priest. And he did that at night. That's when they brought him in there. And it was strictly against Jewish law to do that at night. All types of hearings were supposed to be in daylight only. But of course, this couldn't be daylight. Judas betrayed Christ in the evening. Mary Ruth and I were in Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and we were in the garden, the place where it's reported that Jesus was first arrested. It was night, and for the first time I really understood why it was necessary for this man to say, "The man that I kiss will be him." But you couldn't see very well because there were olive trees there that were over 1,000 years old. It was dark. And once he betrayed him, they took him off. First to Annas, illegal. Secondly, they took him to Caiaphas at night, and even though he was the high priest. They were not supposed to have meetings at night. It's supposed to be during daylight hours. Third, the trial was held during the Passover festival, and this was strictly prohibitive. Why was it held then? Well, this was Thursday night. They had to keep things moving. Now, on Wednesday evening, last evening, this was a time for the Passover festival, which the Jews still have. But this Passover was on the night that Jesus was arrested, and they started the hearing. It was illegal. Fourth, he met before the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin had 71 members, and they were supposed to have 23 members present in order to have a quorum. Don't ask me why that math came up. I don't know. I suspect that Ted Dyer didn't know, but that's what the requirement was. They didn't even have 23 people there of the Sanhedrin during this trial. There were no witnesses called or offered for the defense. Now, I know many of you have seen shows on television, starting with LA Law or The Good Wife or All Rise, which is now popular. And you've seen attorneys get up and do different things from time to time. Can you imagine having a trial and not having anyone present a witness for the defense? Well, they didn't, and that was not legal. Sixth of all, the sixth item, the verdict was reached after they made the charges. Now, this was during an evening and an all-night session. And Jewish law, again, prohibited this. They were supposed to wait 24 hours before verdicts were delivered afterwards, but they didn't do that. They did it immediately. The court members, number 7, the Jewish temple guards and Roman soldiers, along with some of the mob, during this trial, they spat at Jesus. They mocked him. They basically taunted him during the entire process. You think about a courtroom today, what would happen if somebody did that? Yet that's what they did, and it was not legal. Item 8, Caiaphas was the high priest. He was also the president of the Sanhedrin. He was the chief prosecutor of Jesus. This was not legal. Number 9, false witnesses were called. And during this presentation, they couldn't even agree on their testimony. Isn't that interesting? Item 10, blasphemy. This was changed during the trial. And the reason the Jews had to change it was the Romans didn't believe in God. So anything they passed along to them could not be under blasphemy. So they changed it to sedition and treason. The 11th item on the list was Pilate himself. When he delivered Jesus to be crucified, he violated both the Jewish laws and Roman law. Romans did not recognize God, so they could not do anything with blasphemy. And Jews could not carry out death sentences because they were not allowed to. Therefore, the crucifixion was not the Jewish way to do it anyway. During crimes committed in Israel, stoning was the way to end it. This didn't happen. Finally, item 12, Jesus, he recanted his testimony. And he returned to the chief priest and the elders, and he publicly announced that Jesus was really innocent. These officials didn't bother to make this known to anyone. Now, if you think about those 12 reasons and you think about the court of law today, you can imagine this thing would be tied up to go from one proceeding to another. This was the highest court of Israel. Underneath the chief priest and the president of the Sanhedrin, but they didn't even have a quorum. Now, this made a mockery, an entire mockery of justice. That's what Jesus died of. Injustice. Mary Ruth and I had an occasion to walk what's called the Via Dolorosa, the trail that he followed, carrying his cross after he was scourged. I'm sure many of you know that a scourge is made out of leather, and it has small particles of sharp rocks, of glass, and of metal. And when it hits the skin, it tears it away. That's one of the most cruel things that could happen at that time or even now. Jesus carried his cross, the Via Dolorosa, and they have outlined this in different stations over in Israel. At station 5, that's where Jesus stumbled and he failed. And so a fellow by the name of Simon, he had to be fairly tall, I imagine. They called him out and they said, "You carry this cross for him." Nobody knew anything about Simon before that. Nobody knew anything about him after that. That's the only thing that we know. His name was Simon, and he carried the cross. Now at station 7, this is not in the Bible, but the guides there will tell you that a lady left the side there and she took her handkerchief and put it on Jesus' face to wipe the sweat away, the blood, the tears. And sometime later, when she unfolded that and looked at it, we're told that it was a picture of Christ. Now, this is not biblical. This is what was reported. You can believe it or not believe it. I think it's interesting. God could do anything. And if he wanted to have a picture of Jesus' face in a handkerchief, he would have done that. The thing I find interesting is nobody can remember the name of that lady, so they picked out some lady that was fairly well known, I guess, to give her a bit more testimony about it. And so the cross was carried on down to Calvary by Simon. And after Jesus was crucified, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and after he was pronounced dead, you know, the Bible says that it was completely black. The sun was covered. We know that the veil in the temple was torn. And so people realized something highly unusual has happened. And the Roman centurion said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." We know that they had to hurry with this process, though, in taking him down from the cross. And Joseph of Arimathea, he had to go to Pilate, wherever he was, and get permission to take his body down so he could bury him. And all of this had to be done before 6 o'clock, because that's when the Sabbath started. And wouldn't you believe it? Jewish law prohibited people to do anything on the Sabbath like that. They couldn't have a burial service like on the Sabbath. Now, of all the errors, all the miscues that took place in Jesus' trial, oh, they observed that one. So Joseph took him down, and he embalmed him as best he could by putting on the perfumes that were needed for burial and wrapping him in clothes, including his face, and put him in his own tomb. And at the insistence of the Jews and the Roman guards, they rolled a stone up to close it off. Why did they do that? Well, the Jewish leaders said, you know what, if we don't do something like that, why, his disciples will come down here and steal his body, and then they'll claim that he got up by himself. So they wanted to dispute that. And today we're living in a time when that dispute does happen sometimes. As we close this Good Friday, these are the things that happened to Jesus. In a couple of days, it'll be Easter. And it won't be like any Easter we've ever had before. Many of you can remember days when all the ladies got a new bonnet, an Easter bonnet, and they wore it on Sunday. And friends, they were really cool. You old timers can remember that, I know. I don't see many women even wearing hats today, but they did then. And you guys know you put on the best clothes you had, and sometimes you even bought a new suit for Easter. Easter is one of the most significant and well-attended church days during the year. And in a couple of days, we will present the Easter message by taking a look in Corinthians to the things that Paul wrote about it. And I look forward to being with you then. In the meantime, I hope you can enjoy some of the egg hunts that perhaps will be different this year. Many of you can recall hiding eggs here and there and everywhere and going to egg hunts as a child, later as a parent and a grandparent, maybe even a great-grandparent. And some of you can even remember it raining on Easter. It's supposed to rain this year. Well, it won't be any different times it rained for us because you just hide eggs in the house. Of course, there's a slight problem there sometimes, as we discovered, because we didn't find all the eggs, and that hydrogen sulfide, rotten eggs, oh, it'll get to you real quick. But at any rate, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on Easter Sunday.